Yes.
We are going to talk about how not to give feedback today. And then we are going to get to some tips on how to do it.
So I'm going to share my screen just really quick. Give me a second here. So this is what we're going to cover today. I'll put it right on the cover slide before turning to maybe the chat. So I don't think there's an adult that has not been told and heard the word feedback, right? You need to get some feedback. And you know, whether you're encouraged to get feedback, you're encouraged to give feedback. Feedback is a term that's used so commonly. We arguably are at the forefront of feedback. When people say like NextJump and what they've done, they're like the godfathers of feedback in terms of the knowledge behind it, the depth of the data, the research. So researchers come to NextJump continuously. We have around 20 years of research and data and insights about feedback, which of course goes hand in hand with every which way it goes wrong, as much as how to do it right. So the researchers have come, and one of them was a PhD graduate student from Harvard's education school. And she had said this in her dissertation, in her research, that the paradox of feedback. So on one hand, feedback is known to advance both an individual and an organization, right? So think of learning in the workplace, learning as an individual. It's very difficult to learn to correct, whether it's yourself, teams, organizations, without feedback. We all have blind spots. So it advances task performance, it fosters, you know, what they call employee voice. And so giving and getting honest feedback is that critical. But the paradox is it's very, very difficult, especially in the workplace. And it's fascinating that we found that even in schools, teachers are great at giving feedback to students. They encourage students to give feedback to each other. However, the adult teachers are horrible at giving feedback to each other. They cannot, you know,
Peer feedback.
Peer feedback. Yeah. I mean, talk about walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around, just horrible at giving feedback to each other. And feedback, and the challenge of it, it often feels like it's very high stakes. Mm-hmm. It's coupled with performance, maybe social dynamics, mm-hmm. right? I mean, like someone might dislike you, never talk to you again for bad feedback. Mm-hmm. So most of the time, and then of course the worst is it could be tied to your promotion and compensation. Right. So the hard part in feedback though, and so many researchers who've come to us, they've spent years trying to understand feedback. All the data on feedback for the most part, and they just scoured the planet, and there's a lot of papers on this and research. All the data exists either from surveys or from experiments, not the real stuff. The real stuff is all locked up.
Right, it's all behind closed doors, right? You don't usually get to see people receiving or giving and receiving feedback.
You don't get
it's very private, right?
Most companies have not taken their performance evaluation data of feedback and given it to researchers saying, here we go, why don't you study what happened? It's all locked up, it's all confidential, it's all happening behind closed doors and password protected one-to-one sessions. That feedback has been one of the hardest things to understand and study. So before we launch in, if you open your chat, which should be the bottom of your screen, can you punch in maybe some of the worst feedback you've got? Like things when it was done wrong.
Or how you might have reflected and done it wrong too.
Yeah,
I mean,
you could have done it wrong. Yeah. So either given or received. Think about feedback gone wrong. If you don't mind sharing, feedback gone wrong, whether you gave it or you received it. Okay, not mumsy enough.
What's that?
Very, very generic negative feedback. I'm assuming mumsy is
too much
like
emotion. Oh, I see. Or no, maybe not. Okay.
A backhanded feedback, right? There's backhanded compliments. There's backhanded feedback.
Oh, I laughed too much. You're an introvert. I'm not.
Oh yeah, the whole "you're always," right? Like you're labeled and branded,
always,
right?
Oh,
like
right.
This one example represents you all the time.
Right.
Too prescriptive, right?
Don't have leadership skills. Never given feedback into my annual review, so I kept making errors that entire time. Christina, that's exactly right, right? You're giving feedback late, right?
Yes.
And would have been nice to know. ambiguous. Just generalizations, yeah, when it's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
really ambiguous.
Mario mentioned the sandwich. We'll
sandwich.
cover the sandwich.
We'll cover the sandwich.
There's a lot.
I'll have to think about that. When you're told you're doing well, but the body language and generic discussions tell you you are not. Interesting.
Vague and unclear. That's a very common thing. People walk away thinking, was that good or bad?
Yeah.
Like, and depending on where you lean, whether you're on the more over humble, insecure side or the overconfident, arrogant side, people walk away saying, I think I did pretty well, or people walk away saying, God, I suck.
Nothing specific, Linda's saying, right? Oof. Boss took me out to lunch for my birthday and then reamed me out when we got back to the office. That's awful. Okay.
So I think horror stories of feedback. I mean, this list is getting long. You're doing everything fine. That's interesting too. This notion of how do I get better when everything is fine?
Yeah, no feedback at all, right? Or it's inconsistent.
We've done a lot of work with the military, and I mean, with both the Navy and the Air Force in particular. They both have over 600,000 people in each of their services. And the stats we got was over 90-something%. And they might be close to 95% of people in the Air Force, 95-something% of people in the Navy don't receive any feedback all year long. In a 12-month window, you're going through receiving no feedback at all. And so then feedback and coaching go very closely hand in hand. But let me go back to this. So we want to take the time first to talk about how not to give feedback. Some of the common ways, or maybe it's not so common, but how it goes wrong. And why this is so important when you think of leadership in practice versus leadership as a theory is that in theory, people say, do it this way, it's perfect. But in reality, with all our emotions rocking us in situations of how much is happening in our lives, it's very hard to show that, you know, the conference room, that workshop, you know, the classroom perfect leaders show up actually in practice. And so by understanding sometimes how it goes wrong, just eliminating the wrong can oftentimes over time get us to a place where we do better and better by doing less bad. Which I know sounds odd, but doing less bad over time eventually gets you to a place where you start to do better. So I'm going to cover this in more depth, and then Megan's going to give you 4 tactical tips, but I'm going to cover these 4 things of shit sandwich, niceness versus asshole, garden path, time late.
Apologize if we're offending you with the language. We're trying to be visceral and just go direct on this so that it's very clear what we're trying to say. There's other ways to say these things, but we're just going to put it all out there.
We could have used
all adults in
more research-oriented terms that sound savvier, but we're just using simple words to talk like in practice, kind of going to the trenches. Trusted circle here, right? And I put on top the idea of positive versus negative. Think of feedback as positive versus negative. Yes, we could put constructive, you know, versus complimentary or recognition, but just really simple language, positive, negative. The shit sandwich is an attempt to do both at the same time. I think there's a belief that a balanced feedback, if I can balance out my negative with some positive, like that you'll accept it better. Niceness versus asshole. Most people try to go nice, right? You don't want to be an asshole, so that's what it. Then when you start to think, okay, I got to give some critical feedback, and this is where things really start to go wrong. The garden path is you can't get to the point, so there's a lot of preamble before you get to the feedback, to the point you want to make. The time late, the performance evaluation, right? How many times have you been told, 9 months ago, if you had done this and this, we would have promoted you, but now we can't promote you. So I'm telling you what you did wrong 9 months ago. So we'll go into the depth of each one here. So starting with the shit sandwich, I love this cartoon. So let me try to help you get to the middle of it, which is number 4. But 1, you start with praise, right? So the piece of bread, you're a genius. You add some minor changes. Please fix the typos. Then you layer on more praise. Brilliant. Then you add the meat of criticism, right? So the criticism is the meat right there. Then another helping of praise. You have a gift. You know, you're gifted. Cover a few minor edits. Finish with praise again. This is your opus, right? Then bon appetit. And the person's like, I don't eat meat. This is your classic shit sandwich.
I just want to hear the
right?
good.
Yes. So like the creation of the shit sandwich, we have met executives, and this is sort of the industrial age.
Who are trained to do this. Literally, they call it the criticism. There's another thing they call it. What do they call it? I can't remember, but it literally is a process you're taught how to do, which is you start with the good, then you add in the critical, and then you end with good. That's how you run feedback sessions. This is taught in organizations still to this
Trained.
day.
Leadership people have been
Trained.
trained, mostly from the industrial age, but to actually give feedback, critical feedback this way.
I like how somebody went in the military told me once. She said, you know what they do? They say, "Nice boots, you suck. Nice boots." Like that's literally what some of the conversations can feel like.
So this pulled out, literally, this is from a research paper, right? So this is what chit sandwich can sound like. I have some critical feedback to give you. I will start with some positives to relax you, then give you the negative feedback, which is the real purpose of the meeting. And I'll end with more positive feedback so that you are not disappointed, unmotivated, or angry at me when this conversation ends.
How does that work for you?
The whole idea that like you're gonna get your guard down, right? Because the real purpose is to tell you right, what you're doing wrong.
Get you all relaxed,
right?
Guard down.
Then I'm gonna punch you in the gut, right? But then to make sure you leave, not upset, right? I'm gonna throw you more compliments and talk about how great you are. And that's how we're gonna run our shit sandwich feedback giving. So this notion, first and foremost, is the shit sandwich is for the industrial age and probably didn't even work then. Throw it out. Do not do it. The idea here is this.
Yeah.
Pick a lane.
Yeah.
There's a time for positive. There's a time for negative. Pick a lane. When you try to do both at the same time, there's a couple things it does. First, that when you are giving the positive feedback to offset the negative, it diminishes the value of the positive when you even give the positive. When you mean to compliment someone, it matters less because you are so dilutive when you try to do both at the same time. Pick a lane, because if you don't, there's a disservice to both sides. A lot of times, the intention of taking that energy you have to take to give someone feedback is to help them, to get them to improve. They walk away confused.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's interesting. They walk away confused. Last week, if you were with us, we talked a lot about how two different kinds of, on the extreme side, the insecure versus arrogant, the two different kinds of people. The insecure will walk away from a discussion like that confused, but pick out mostly the bad, and they'll remember the negative more than even hearing the rest, because if they're insecure, that's what they pick up on. But the arrogant will walk away thinking, I think I did pretty good. I think I'm good. And they'll sort of forget the bad. Like it's
to
called,
the point,
it's
they
called
might
confirmation bias,
think,
right?
and they sometimes walk away thinking, you know, I think I'm going to get promoted.
Ah, that was an awesome
Like,
meeting.
And,
you're
and they
confused.
kind of like heard, like, you
It's
know,
not good. Yeah.
they had a
it's
couple
not good.
pieces of criticism, but there was a lot more praise. Net, I think I'm doing a lot better than most people.
You hear what you want to hear, right?
And so it's not good for the receiver. It's not good for the giver.
Yep.
Second thing, this cartoon I love, we found this years back, how people stand behind this booth of comforting lies. The person who gives unpleasant truths is, in short, the asshole. The person who's giving comforting lies, we use the term niceness. There's a researcher who told us niceness is a term for inauthentic kindness. Inauthentic kindness is niceness. And organizations are filled with niceness, not kindness. And so, which one are you? Are you gonna be the person sitting behind the booth of comforting lies, giving niceness? Or are you gonna be the person sitting behind the booth of unpleasant truths, otherwise known as the asshole? Now, there is a individual who left Google and then created a whole business around this notion of radical candor. And she built, it's Kim Scott. She built this little grid. And the whole point of this, and she studied years of data, especially while working at Google, and looking at startups and other companies, where radical candor in the upper right is what you want. And the best way I'd put it is someone is able to give you radical candor. It's another word for tough love.
Or truth with care.
Truth. So
right?
When you think about a coach, a great coach, performance coach, or just even any kind of coach in your life, you think of a leader or manager. This is what we aspire to be on the upper right, radical candor. On the bottom left, right? The bottom left is where you don't want to be. And this is the individual that most people will say, I don't trust them. I consider them a liar, right? They leave out stuff. They don't tell me the truth. Now, they may not use language as strong as liar, but that's where we want to avoid. So we want to avoid the bottom left. We want to be in the upper right, right? Simple, got it, go do that. Well, it's not so simple in practice, right? Because what we found in practice over time is this: being a coach or being a liar is the end point of where you get to. But the choice you have to make, as in not the outcome, but the process to get to the outcome, really lies in this choice of ruinous empathy versus obnoxious aggression. And this is what I call the transit zone. If you ever go to the airport years back now, or months back, 6 months back, or whatever it was, right, before the pandemic, or you go to hotels, they have what they call these transit lounges or a transit zone. It's deliberately built to be temporary. You go there to get out of it. So it's a temporary spot to visit, but that is the target. You have to go to the transit zone, and the choice you have really is this: are you going to pick niceness, or are you going to end up picking the asshole? And the reason why this is important is that over time, when you pick niceness, which is what they call ruinous empathy, you're choosing to show care and sacrifice the trade-off of being direct on truth. The flip side is you're going to be direct. I'm going to prioritize truth, and I'm going to trade off on showing care. This is a tough choice because, of course, you want both, which is what coach or radical candor is. I want to show care, and, of course, I want to be direct. I want to be honest. And whenever you have two things, there's always a choice of what comes first. What do you make sure I'm gonna, 51% majority, make sure I get this right, and then try to do the other thing, the secondary thing right. When you pick care, as in niceness first, over time, you always end up in a place of being a liar. But when you end up picking being direct, being honest, which in the beginning, they call that obnoxious aggression or being an asshole. Over time, if you stick to it consistently, you end up being the coach, the radical candor, the person someone goes to for advice, for guidance. We aspire to be in the upper right if you want to get there. And this is what came out from Kim Scott and their research as well. When, of course, radical candor is number one, the best. So the question is, what's number two? What's second best? Is it ruinous empathy or is it obnoxious aggression? And they basically found out of those two, being an asshole, obnoxious aggression trumps ruinous empathy. Both are bad choices, but obnoxious aggression is a better choice because if you stick to it, over time, you will get to the right place. The other one, as you stick to ruinous empathy, the niceness, you get a team of liars. And the greatest form of lying that happens is silence. You get a team that is like walking on eggshells.
Just avoids it, right?
Scared to talk about difficult topics, and so we avoid as much as possible. So that notion of the is not is the choice of the niceness to become a liar. The harder choice, once again, is the choice to be, I'm gonna be an asshole, to be, and once again, not asshole in the sense of being direct, right? It's gonna say things I'm gonna regret, but I'm gonna get to a place to learn care after first learning to be direct. So again, using tough language because it's so easy to choose the niceness. It's hard to choose the asshole, that obnoxious aggression, which is a fancy research term for asshole, before you get to a place that you want to be at. This is a really hard one in practice.
Yes, we're going to give some tactical tips
Of how to do this the right way,
later.
because this has a cost if done the wrong way, of course. Please do not, after this class, go into your boss's Zoom.
Okay, we're going to
right?
get into this, yes.
So don't do that. The garden path, right? I love this cartoon. Patient sits at the doctor and says, the good news is we got your test results back in record time. The idea is this: we believe people are so fragile.
Yeah.
We believe they're so fragile that they cannot take the truth. They cannot take directness. Yeah. In fact, we ran a feedback workshop. So there's one actually today at 1 o'clock if you want to see it. This is a live coaching session where Megan and I and another senior next jumper will be giving live feedback to people as they share their life journey, leadership journey. It's tough stuff in front of hundreds of people, but we're taking a chance and kind of exposing it so to see what it looks like live. The kind of stuff, a performance eval that happens only in closed doors, we're exposing it to COA attendees. But the idea that people are so fragile, you can't give direct feedback. We ran this program with 10 and 11-year-olds, and you would be shocked how much direct feedback they wanted.
Stronger than you think. We are stronger than we think we are. Yeah, we saw kids who were 11, 12, 13 years old, brought them in here. The president of their school came. They were giving presentations and we were judging and scoring them and critical feedback. And they handled it better than some of our adults. And I remember thinking, God, if I got that training when I was that age, where would I be, right? It's because it is a muscle, it's a skill. And then they were craving it. A few of them were leaving and go to the elevator and they're like, oh, I want to go again. I want to go again. Like, I want to do better. I want to take the guidance I got and feedback I got. I want to apply it and see if I can, like in real time, they wanted to try again.
And what's interesting, by the way, is the millennial, the centennial, the younger generation, they call them either the review generation, the feedback generation. They're used to it as an expectation. If you go to the Apple App Store and an app has no reviews, as in no feedback, it's already seen as bad. Getting no feedback to them is bad. They look at the number of pieces of feedback and then, of course, the score as well. Yeah. Like if you just get like a 5-star rating, but there's only one piece of feedback, it's considered bad. The number matters, but also the score matters. Yeah. Both matter. And so this notion, if you go shop at Amazon, buy a product, there's no reviews, guess what? You're like, I'm not sure I'm going to buy it. There's an expectation of actually being able to read what other people are saying of any given situation. Yet, it's still very hard to do. The idea of what you see in the Apple App Store or going to Amazon and buying anything, it's the same thing, ideally, you want to see in every organization. I wonder how everyone's doing. Oh, Chris in Seattle, he's got 5,000 reviews and his average rating is, 3.9 out of 4. That's really good. Laura only has 2 reviews and her average rating might be 3.9, but it's only 2. Like, if you could operate that way, you would know easily who to go to team-wise, who to partner with, who to go to for advice, who to go to for any help. But that type of transparency is what they crave, yet they're not getting it. So we've seen leaders in the largest of organizations struggling with the notion of they're asking for feedback, but I don't know how to get them there because the belief, like this doctor, from the senior industrial age leadership, right, the way they were trained, shit sandwich trained, people are fragile and they can't take it. They don't give them enough credit for their ability to take the truth. We cover this in one of our earlier LIP classes called the ladders of inference. The simple idea behind the ladders of inference, the red zone up there is the conclusion, meaning give the conclusion, as in get to the point, then give me the backup. Give me the bullets behind the conclusion. The garden path would be, let me give you this. I'm like, what are we talking about? And then maybe 45 minutes into it, I'm trying to tell you, so we're not going to promote you. You're like, what? Like,
there's a term the military uses a lot called the bluff, stands for bottom line up front. Give the bluff and then explain, right? The details, the bullets behind it. In fact, if you're using our feedback app to give feedback to Charlie and I for this session or any other co-op classes, you'll notice we showed you last week too, we were pulling up some of the analytics, but the point is you put in the number first. You put in far exceed, meeting expectations or below. You're deliberately scoring first, right? Yes. That's the conclusion. And then you're adding your bullets.
Yes. So actually I meant to add the slide in here. The way we ended up building the technology over time was exactly to help prevent the bad behavior of garden pathing and challenging and getting people to get used to the behavior of conclusion first. So we have an app that says 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 ratings, by the way, is bad because you know what, you want to play safe, you go middle of the road. In 1, 2, 3, 4, there is no middle of the road. Do you know how many things, and people don't know, they give you a 3 out of 5 because it's right in the middle, right? It's not a 1, 2, it's not a 4, 5, it's a 3. So to prevent that sort of cop-out choice, it's only 4. It's like a GPA 1, 2, 3, 4. A 1 is simply saying to someone, you're going in the wrong direction. It's like correct the direction. 2, which is meeting expectations, is saying you're going in the right direction, right? But I'm worried that your rituals and habits might not keep you there. 3 is exceeding expectations. I believe that when I fast forward 3 to 6 months out, you will still be successful. A 4 is saying you are a model example. I want to put you on the wall and use you as a case study example. Like that's what a 4 is. And a 4 is that rare. And when you give feedback this way, you get very good at not garden pathing and practicing conclusion first. Is it good or bad? Then you explain. The last piece of tip of how not to give feedback is what a lot of us have experienced in employee performance evaluations. In the military, they call them fit reps, right? Which comes from an age-old thing, I think, of trying to stay in shape, which you have to actually get evaluated on as well. But in most companies, right, the performance evaluation, that dreaded thing that ends up determining your compensation, your bonus, your promotion. The joke is that the manager that I don't see at all, who lives up way in the mountaintop in some cave, comes out of the cave once a year to sit down with me to then give me my evaluation and to explain to me why I'm not going to be promoted because of these mistakes they saw 9 months ago, 6 months ago. And the person sitting there, this notion of time late, I wish you had told me that because I could have corrected and improved and earned my promotion, as opposed to I have to wait another year now because I didn't know you weren't happy with what I did. The notion of attacking time late. This is very difficult for people. There's a quote from Albert Einstein about the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. But as a society, we flip this and we honor the servant and we forgot about the gift. The idea, and so Daniel Kahneman, another researcher, did work on this. They call it System 1 versus System 2. System 2 is the logical brain. It's the rational thinking mind, analytics. We love data and analytics. Yet the most powerful judgment, decision-making that occurs comes from System 1, which is our intuitive mind, what we call visceral. You know, when someone says, what does your gut say? Most decisions that are key in life, you'll see our gut is driving that decision. That gut is our intuition. And so the notion that time late, how many times we get feedback that's just too late to do anything about, the association, when someone's upset at you about something that happened 9 months ago, even last week or 2 months, a month ago, they're upset at you because they've been holding in this baggage, this accumulated, undealt with, feedback to give you. And the receiver's like,
where's this coming from?
Where's this coming from? I'm kind of over that loss and I'm struggling with your emotion against how I feel.
I think that happens a lot in parenting, right? Your kid does something wrong, you hold it in, like it's not that bad, and then maybe something else a week later, and then it's like a week later when they do something that doesn't even feel like a big deal and you flip out. You're like, why are you so upset? And then you bring up something they did weeks ago. It like makes no sense to them.
So on the flip side,
yeah,
we want to take a second in the chat. Yeah. Either as a feedback giver.
Sorry, this is funny. Seagull managers, we call them. They fly in and shit on everything and then disappear.
Oh, yes. I like that.
I never heard that. We're looking at all your comments.
No, I love the whole, my wife called me an asshole. I call her nice to a fault. Yeah, you can call her niceness and she can call you asshole and saying we both suck. Right? we got a lot of work to do. But in the chat really quick, the flip side.
Yeah, positive interactions with feedback.
And that's not necessarily positive feedback, but good critical feedback.
Well done. Critical feedback done well.
Either giving it or receiving it. Punch in something that comes to mind when you think of this feedback done well. Yeah. How it's benefited you, how it's It's
interesting. Somebody sharing this shit sandwich is trained. Yeah.
If you appreciate, someone private messaged us that we're all adults in the room here, so hopefully none of you are offended by the language. The kids' classes work on opposite times, so on even hours. So the kids' classes, obviously this would not be what we use. Let's see. Okay, scroll down.
Yeah,
with some good stuff.
I'm just looking at all the other comments you guys are putting in.
So elevated me, love it.
Timely feedback.
You know what's interesting about the notion of timely feedback? They refer to often in sports. Think of a golf swing or even a tennis swing. They call them real-time adjustments. A great coach gives you adjustments in real time, and that's how you learn, because you're literally getting that feedback adjustment, and then you go back in the game and you're trying it until it fits right. It's going through your system in real time. Imagine if tennis pros, or tennis coaches or golf coaches coached athletes annually. Imagine if they say, so I'm going to give you feedback now for your football season, right? Or your golf season or tennis season, all by video. You don't learn that way. That real-time adjustment is critical to be able to learn.
wow, Josh, you had a boss that told you you're an asshole and no one liked to work with you? I can't even believe that. Maybe that's why, I mean, you're so
But he
opposite
said,
of
change
that
my life. I
now.
needed the pain to
I
actually see.
know.
So we're talking
Wow.
about feedback done well. This one, I guess, in Josh's mind, for him was really good.
Jeez.
Which once
Fantastic.
again,
See, you need the truth.
I mean,
I would never
there
know
are
that.
times.
Oh. Wow. This is amazing. Should we go into and then we'll,
Okay.
this is really cool. Yeah, real time adjust 20 years ago. I believe that, Josh. Yes. That's good. Okay. So hopefully this is helpful, what Charlie just walked through. These are the kind of at the highest level, the is nots and then the is in terms of giving feedback. But tactical tips. So there's 4 tactical tips. There's only a few more minutes here. We weren't going to, so we can have some time for Q&A, but we weren't going to go through every single one. There's pieces in here I've mentioned before in our class. So tactical tips, there's 4 we wanted to share today of what not to do tactically and then what to do. So for instance, number 1, eye-to-eye feedback. Sometimes they say kneecap to kneecap. I'll take you through, there's blindsiding, there's other pieces, but on this first one, eye-to-eye versus shoulder to shoulder. You know, giving feedback, critical feedback, negative feedback, whatever you want to call it, is hard enough already as it is. And a lot of people will say, you have to be eye to eye. You have to be looking at the person, you know. That's true on one hand. On the other hand, if you're practicing what Charlie was talking about, right, to get to radical candor and that obnoxious aggression asshole bucket, it's very hard to do for most people. Is it possible? Yes. There's some people it's really easy to just look right at them and say, you suck. Maybe. But for most people, that's really hard. And so not making it easier for yourself to not have to look at somebody in the eye when you're saying it, it can feel like a lack of courage, maybe less, you know, courageous thing to do, but it's actually tactically the better thing to do if you need to get it out, right? It's a way to get it out. And we say shoulder to shoulder.
And the whole reason is this is, you know, I think, I can't remember what the stat was, something like 80% of communication is nonverbal, right? So that's only one section of the communication. And then conversations, by the way, happen in meta form, right? And so the classic example, we spend time with professional poker players and they say, in poker, you have to be super self-aware.
Yeah.
Then you have to be aware of the other player. Then you have to be aware of them being aware of you. And now you have to,
Yeah.
it's like,
You get
you're
in your
aware
head.
of their awareness of you. And it goes back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, I'm giving someone critical feedback. I'm looking at them. I'm wondering, what are they thinking of me right now? They're thinking what they're in their head thinking, and then what am I thinking of their thing? It's just like so it's a really hard thing to do, right? To actually get out what needs to get out and be able to process it when you're looking at each other eye to eye for both people.
And what's fascinating is if you think about poker as an example, you know, when they wear those sunglasses that look like eyeballs, but it's reflectors so you can't see their eyes, the idea that they don't want you to read them.
Right.
Because the reading someone's facial expression is enough to throw the whole thing haywire on your own emotions and judgment. They're trying to put like a poker face. The idea that when you look someone eye to eye and you're about to deliver critical or bad news, it is very tough. And that already alone is going to make you fail. It's already hard enough to get right. And this notion is an old age. This is one of those general notions that are generally
general
wrong.
notions generally wrong, right? We're not robots. We're not robots. Like, we're human. I think people want to skip that human process thing. Well, you can't skip it because we are human, right? So this is an example of the shoulder to shoulder. The notion of if you think about some of the toughest conversations you've had, whether it's with a spouse or with a child or with a colleague, just think about anytime you're having a difficult conversation, just think difficult conversation. Lots of times it happens when you're traveling, when you're taking a walk, sitting on the same side of the table in performance evals, for example, is one of the things we'll do. Like laying in bed with your spouse, like when you're not looking at each other. You know, even sitting down with your spouse, watching a movie, sitting on the couch, watching TV, even you might end up talking, but you're not looking at each other. And that, you know, I've had walks with my son where I feel like I'm getting more out of him by just walking. We're not looking in the car. Like you end up being able to go there on tougher discussions when you're not eye to eye. So I think traveling in general, taking walks, laying in bed on the couch. Sometimes I think even in the dark, I think, you know, with spouse or even with my kids, I've done that at night, reading a book, and then they start to, you know, we're chatting, but we're not looking at each other. It's really effective. In the workplace, sitting on the same side of the table is amazing what that will do. we you know, in our evaluations, we'll put up, we use, so you can't see our full office here, but we have huge sheets, those big Post-it, what they call butcher block sheets. And we'll just write up about, you know, the challenge we might be going through or some of the difficult conversations we want to have. And we put it up on the wall and we sit on the same side. Even if it's for a discussion about me, I might be struggling on something. We'll put it up and Charlie and I will both sit on the same side and look at it together. So now it's like our problem, our challenge, and we're looking at the same thing versus I feel like he's judging me. I'm kind of judging him, but I'm trying to think about what I need to think about. And it just goes haywire when you're looking at each other.
Yeah, the conversation, you almost forget what you're going to talk about because you're now looking at their expression, they're looking at your expression, you're reacting to each other's expressions. You're like, oh my God, that already is hard enough. So I'm just thinking a funny story where, I mean, this is years ago. I have a brother who's 9 years younger than me. And I remember, I think when I was in college, having to have the conversation with him about the birds and the bees, right? So we went and played basketball. It was like one evening and then we're walking back home. And somehow like he was going to go like a year abroad and somewhere in Europe. So like I felt like I needed to discuss and broach this topic. And we're walking side by side, both have basketballs in their hands. And as this topic is coming up, right, he's dribbling faster and faster in the road. I'm throwing the ball in the air to myself faster and faster. And just that fidget nature, and we were not looking at each other at all in the eye as we walked several blocks with basketballs moving at rapid pace, talking about what was a difficult conversation for us at that point.
God, that's good advice for the birds and the bees. I just did that eye to eye with it and I got a what? And it was probably better done shoulder to shoulder. Anyway, okay. And then, so look, we're not going to go through all of them. That was most of what we had, I think. But on the second one, I'll just quickly go through the blindsiding. I think we brought this up last week. I think, you know, the typical manager will send you an email. I want to see you. Come see me. And you're like, oh, is this good? You know, just, I think giving people a heads up of what's about to happen, you know, it's so little. Even situationally letting them know what we're going to talk about. But what I put in here is the crutch phrases. Actually delivering that critical feedback. It's just letting somebody brace for impact. That's the way I look at it. Blindsiding is bad. It's bad. It's not a human, it's just not a good process unless you really have, I don't know. I'm sure there's situations. I can't.
Sports.
In sports, maybe.
To beat an opponent, you want to catch them off guard.
Yes.
Yeah, blindsiding them.
That
fantastic.
works. Yes.
Works to win.
But there, I think, are crutch phrases for the feedback giver and then for the, you know, for the feedback giver themselves. And I think, you know, things like, you know, I've done this before where I'll have somebody walking into my office. I think this is going to be a tough conversation, you know, and it gives yourself permission, you permission to kind of go there and say what you need to say quickly and viscerally and kind of in real time as opposed to the garden path. Just, I think it's going to be a tough conversation and just go into it.
Versus the classic, like, hey, haven't seen you in a while. How was vacation?
Yeah, you start the
How was
chit
this?
chat.
You know, how's the family? Boom.
Yeah.
It's like
I do that. It's no good. I tend
terrible.
to do that. I want to do the chit chat. I'm definitely a chit chatter. And then their guard is all down. It's like, and then you're like, well, so we have a really tough conversation. But it's not bad if you have to, but it's like, at least give them a heads up of what it's going to be a tough discussion. And there's some stuff we need to talk about. I think just that little piece, again, like it's bracing for impact and it actually is making it easier for them to process it. That's what you want. You want them to hear you. So if you don't want them to hear you, blindside them and punch them in the gut. But if you want them to hear you, you know, you give them a little bit, you just give them a little.
I like one of the other ones you do, which is you can tell them this is hard for me.
Yeah.
That's okay too.
Yeah.
For many of us, this is a very hard thing to do. And they know that you're doing it now to be honest and be critical, but
it's going to be hard for you
too.
and this is going to be really hard for me. You might say, well, it's harder for them because they're going to be taking that critical feedback. But if you're having a hard time doing it and it's not going to come out, you're better off at least telling them and being honest. This is hard for me. I'm going to have a hard time getting this out.
Yes.
That's human. And then the other one's this one time versus the LBR. I think we've talked about the LBR, but the idea that feedback is not going to be just one time. I think when you think as a feedback giver, this is the only time I'm going to have to tell them this, I think it goes bad.
It goes very bad.
It's just like, it's like, I'm going to see you. And if I say the wrong thing or that you put so much pressure on that one discussion versus knowing it's going to be more than one discussion. And even setting that up,
that's
right?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
As the feedback giver, you're putting undue pressure on yourself.
To
that I have to deliver a perfect message.
Right.
Right. One time, it's almost like I have one Oscar speech.
Yeah.
And then once I'll never win again.
Yeah.
Right. That one time done. So that's a fascinating point. I was
Yeah.
going to say the
Yeah.
flip side is the fact that the receiver doesn't hear you the first
They
time.
don't hear you.
You know,
Yeah.
if like, and how
Yeah.
many times I've seen
Yeah.
leaders and managers says, I've already told them that feedback. I'm like, are you sure they heard you?
Yeah.
Are you sure you didn't shit sandwich and add something else? Or are you sure maybe like you literally gut punched them so they're so out of breath they didn't hear what you said because their ears just went, you know, numb.
Right.
Like this idea that it's gonna take more than one time. Like,
and then for the LBR, the idea of that is bring it to light. But then you're gonna, and this is where it's not one time. Bring it to light. You're sometimes gonna need a break and then revisit the topic. I think we tend to want to force the person we're giving feedback to process it and accept it all in that same sitting. That's so unlikely to happen. I mean, it's just not human, right? Like you're hearing something critical, you're naturally going to feel some defensive mechanism, different fight or flight mechanisms are going to kick in, but it's amazing what you'll process, what you'll accept with a little break, and then to revisit the conversation. But I think people, oh, I don't want to drag this out. God forbid I have to talk about this again. But if your intention is to coach them and you have high expectations for them and you want them to grow, you can't skip this process.
and this is something that we've seen, whether it's in teachers and professors, coaches, managers.
As a parent,
like if you prepared your speech, your feedback well, your blind spot is you assume they'll receive it well.
Right.
I prepped this perfectly. I had a thesis point, backed up bullets. I even made pictures and slides and examples. And so you think I delivered it so well, they received it so well. It's not true.
Yeah.
Great coaching, great teaching, always, it's on the receiver's end.
And unfortunately, you find this out over time. And if
Yes.
you're only doing this once a year, you find out a year later they disagreed with you.
Or didn't hear anything
Didn't hear anything you said because they were on tilt, right? They were fight and flight and just heard nothing.
And number 4 is important.
Yeah, anyone, so it is not anyone, right? This is where you don't practice. The feedback giving is a muscle. You can get better at this and you will get better at, but you have to train. And so training on anyone and going into danger zones, no good. There are going to be people, circles of safety. There's going to be people where it's easier to practice.
There's going to be topics that are easier.
Topics that are
right?
easier. Oh, that's
you don't have to start with like your most important revenue or mission job.
Yeah.
And then we give some feedback of how to run this nuclear submarine better. Like, not even at the place to start. Like, let me start with. I mean, don't
Something
pick the biggest.
easier.
Start easier, smaller side projects where even the
idea.
argument gets a little silly in hindsight, where you could even laugh about it.
Mm.
I can't believe we're arguing about the dinner napkins, or I can't believe we're arguing about what drink we're going to have tonight. Like, pick smaller things and practice on those, and pick with individuals that you can not get fired by.
And so in summary, we like this little muscle. We didn't make this. We found this is cool, right? Feedback giving is a muscle. It is a muscle. It takes time. It takes practice. I think the notion that the best way to actually receive candid feedback and radical candor is to give it. We talked last week about the way to get this whole flywheel going. If you want more feedback in your life, you want to coach, you need to practice giving it. And so these are all the tactical tips and strategic tips of how to do that. And then in terms of the final slide, we're getting some Q&A here, but we just summarized the 4 is nots and is of how, not to give feedback, how to give it, and then the 4 tactical tips that we just covered. So hopefully this resonates for you guys. We'll kind of stop sharing our screen and we'll get into some Q&A and let's do this.
So go into the chat. I don't know what questions you have, what thoughts are going through your head. Put some in there. We'll try to maybe get you to unmute some, and we're going to put it in grid mode so we can see your gorgeous faces. So I'll tweak some of the slides. The whole video will be available. I don't know. We should use SharePoint and actually allow the slides to be up there too.
Yeah, somebody likes our Megachar. Someone in the Air Force years ago called us Megachar. We're our own transformer.
Yes, we are better, as Megachar versus when it's Meg versus Char. Just,
Sometimes Meg can be pretty good and Char can be pretty. Carla's laughing. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Is there any questions you guys have? Like on, we can actually go back up. There's a bunch of commentary in here. The lack of eye contact example, is this cultural? Interesting. I don't know. It could be a little cultural. For certain cultures, it's harder to look in the eye or not look in the eye. In some cultures, let me see, sorry, hold on. In some cultures, if you go down, you were seen as, where is it? As
with
rude if it's
no
no eye contact.
And this is where
UK.
obviously if presenters don't look at people in the eye, yes.
Mm,
But I think we're talking about
This is what-
difficult conversations.
right.
Difficult conversations with people that really matter in your life. You want that topic and conversation to go well. And
I
so,
hate, you know, when people say, doesn't it lack courage to do it, not do it eye to eye, or is it culture? It's like, you know, it's not going to happen if you don't have ways to build a ramp. It's about building a ramp to practice the muscle. I think eventually you get to a place where you can give somebody radical candor, like that visceral truth, that critical feedback eye to eye, but people aren't getting it, is the point. Nobody's getting that critical feedback, right? So not enough anyways. If you're getting it once a year, that's the same as not getting it. If you want to get it more frequently, you have to set it up so that it's easier to give. And if you really want to hear it. So that's my.
Chris from Disney, can you unmute and just your comment? It's fascinating. This is something that's an interesting point. Can you share with the group what you wrote?
Just that every time or anytime the manager needed to talk to you, it was only bad. That was it. I transferred departments, and we did, during my 30 days, the new manager took me on a walk and talk just to figure each other out. How he asked me, how do I take feedback? What do I need? And I shared with him, I want feedback all the time. Please, it'll only help me get better. That's why someone gives feedback. But he realized that my last manager only gave feedback when it was bad. It was never a compliment. I never did anything right, even though, yes, I obviously still had a job, so I was doing something right. But that was it. And it was maybe 3 times a year, and it was something really, really small. So now my new manager, who I've been with for a year, will say, hey, let's walk and talk later. But it's not bad. It's not bad. I'm like, you shouldn't have to do that, but you have to do that. Because my guard is already immediately up, and I'm immediately spiraling to what do I need to do? What did I do bad? Oh my gosh.
It's almost like you think of the manager like the work, the job is like a sports game that's running, and they're the referee with a whistle. And when they see something going wrong, they're blowing the whistle, and that's coming to my office. I can give you the feedback so something doesn't go wrong. That whole corrective notion. And managers feel that responsibility, so then quickly subordinates associate when it's like getting called in the principal's office, right? The principal is dealing with only issues. And so when you get called in the principal's office, no one thinks, wow, I'm going to get recommended, promoted, like recognized. It's more like, uh-oh, what did I do? It's fascinating. And I mentioned this because the flip side of what a leader has to do is to build a ritual deliberately. This is hard to do. Like what we do in Coronitas, the 5 o'clock ritual. When you set that up, you're creating a deliberate, repeated battle rhythm every week where you get together as your team. And this is where you're sharing like who helped you succeed. We had this interesting conversation, by the way. Gratitude is something you want to see a lot in organizations. But if you want gratitude as a muscle to show up, gratitude is the outcome you get if you invest in the process of asking this question, who helped you succeed?
You're recognizing each other for
If
helping
everyone
others.
goes and tries to help someone succeed, you're going to see a lot of gratitude show up. And so you want to create a window, you know, like a repeated, in essence, meeting that is looking to celebrate that. And then when you balance that happening on a recurring ritualistic basis, it will balance out the discussions you might have with managers on corrections. Because the tough part for the manager is they have to correct. And when something's happening like a referee, they have to blow the whistle or a supervisor to stop something from happening, correct it. It's part of their job, but they don't balance out the other side. So that has to be a deliberate path you have to create, a ritual. Joran from the UK, I loved your question. Can you unmute if you're there and ask?
Yes, so the question was, if you have someone in your team who has very low self-esteem, but you have to give them feedback because of their performance, and whenever you try to talk to them, they get almost like really crushed and don't want to listen anymore. Like, how can you approach the conversation and not crush their confidence?
No, I love it. Love it in the sense of, I mean, this is a very common thing we hear. right? First-time managers or even most leaders, they believe that they can't take it. It will crush their confidence. They're already doing badly. So why go and, stomp on their grave or like kind of rain on what is already kind of like a very bad situation? And so there are a couple steps to this. First and foremost, if someone doesn't want to get better, if someone doesn't want feedback, it doesn't matter what you say. Like, there's a part that they're not ready for. And so we talked about this from the person you're coaching, that self, that individual, 51% of them, right? As in the majority, 51% is majority, has got to want to improve. And people display different signals for it, right? You know, when someone's checked out and doesn't want to try anymore, like they're not there. So you have to try to get them to what we call gas, give a shit and try. And you'll see when someone keeps trying, the 51%, it just has to go a little bit more than 49 to 51. So first and foremost, they have to want it. But then as the coach or the leader, there are two elements of faith that matters. The first faith, and I think we shared this maybe in last class around this Wes Moore.
Yeah.
The first faith you have to believe that they can improve. You have to be able to visualize a better version of them, that if trained and if they improve, they can get better. Now, a lot of us, when we're frustrated, saying, you know what, I've seen so many data points, that person cannot improve. The best thing to think about, the mind trick, is imagine your child. And if you don't have children, imagine your parents thinking of you as your child.
That you can't grow. You can't
There's
get
no
better.
parent who does not think their kid can improve on anything. Meaning, like, the growth mindset we all have for our children, our parents have for us, for the most part. That same mindset, it takes a level of generosity, a level of just like, open up your closed mind and thought to think, this person could get better. Maybe like there's different training, whatnot, but they could get better. It's like the Rocky movies or anything, right? Anyone can get better, but you have to be able to have the faith they can get better. They're not there now, which is okay. That's the reality, but the faith they will get better. It's the first faith you need. But there's a second piece of faith you need. You have to have faith that I can coach them. I can help them get there. That's also hard for leaders to do.
Right.
Because first, you need the self to have the intrinsic 51% motivation. You need the faith they can get there. You need the faith that you can help them get there. I know that's a lot.
Right, and you can say that, right, to make it easier on their confidence, saying, I'm saying this because I believe you can get there, but if you don't truly mean it, right, this is where if you don't mean it and your actions don't show that, then you can't keep using that line, right?
That's
but
the whole liar thing.
That's the liar.
Right? Like, you know, the ruinous empathy. You don't mean it, but you do that. Oh, I know you can get better. I believe in you, and you don't mean it. Over time, you will be seen as a liar. People talk about trust. How do I build trust? Well, if you lie a lot, you're not going to get a lot of trust. And people don't think, well, I'm just being positive. Is that lying? Well, if you don't mean it, it is lying. And your actions will show it, right? When it's a project that you need someone on, right? Guess what? You're not going to them, right? They're like, please pick me. I'll do it. I'll volunteer.
Yeah.
And you look away and you kind of find a way to piss them off. Like, but I'm volunteering. Why don't you? You thought I was capable. This notion that people are watching every signal, much more than even your verbal. The 80-something% nonverbal, every behavior, action, choice. So it's a hard thing to do. And oftentimes the best way to get there as a leader or coach is you have to kind of experience it yourself. Oftentimes when we think about why we believe so much, like we have, siblings, twin sibling Megan has, and I have a younger sibling, 2 years younger. We both were the dumb siblings in our family. Like, and I know that sounds like, no, but it's true.
They're like,
We were
nice,
the dumb siblings.
Nice.
My
Nice share,
sister-
Shirley. Nice share.
My sister went to Harvard. I got rejected at Harvard. And in Korean culture, that is literally like the child who was blessed in gold and the child is covered in shit. Like, I mean, just the difference of parents flocking. What's it like at Harvard? And the comment from my sister would be, oh, Harvard's different. I was like, how would you know it's different? You haven't been to another school. And she's like, it's just different. Like, and it's like this notion of coming, the whole underdog story of you getting better at something. When you see yourself that got better at something,
Yes.
you have to say, how did I get there?
I got there
Now-
because I got the critical feedback, right? I mean, it
I
gives
got
you-
the critical-
You're saying
I-
it gives them,
well, I
it gives them
tried hard.
confidence to deliver that feedback. I think Josh, is it Usden? I think I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. I thought your question was really cool around feedback being based on intuition. I don't know if you're still here.
Yeah, I'm still here. It was used and it was close,
Oh.
but it's a tricky one, so I'll let you off.
Okay, thank you.
I don't even remember my feedback, to be honest.
Oh.
I've been like just
said
reading
that-
everyone else's. I actually was I actually quite liked one that Chris from Seattle said about, and it's something, I'll let you come to. Yeah, I was thinking, I'm a relatively new manager, and so if I'm giving feedback, then I like to have objectives. My boss has trained me, I suppose, to kind of say, make it fact-based. I work in analytics as well, so that's very much, here's what you need to. It makes it easier in some ways, but I'm a talker, as you can probably tell. I like to be nice, so I do find giving bad feedback. But what I'm thinking is, if I've got something I say, you didn't deliver this was late, you've kind of got some ammo. If you have this situation where you think, I don't think this person's really switched on in this role, like you've got nothing really to back it up. I guess it's, what are some tips to deal with that? Like you can't back it up. It's just I just feel this.
Right.
Oh, I don't know, Josh, if you're going here. Like, what ends up happening is this. Oftentimes the idea of, well, I'm being too judgmental. I'm coming to
Observe
conclusion
that.
too quick.
Right.
Give them more time,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe they screwed up. Give
Yeah.
them more time. New hires, new managers, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the most deadly in practice mistakes. Someone told us years ago, remember, a CEO of this public, company, a new hire is on their best behavior in the first 30 days. Whatever you see is only going to get worse, right? Think of it this way. They're on their absolute best behavior,
Yeah.
right? So and so it's only going to get worse. So if you're not able to jump into that corrective discussion there, it's only going to get worse. And then someone wrote, I think, Kimi something, or maybe I butchered your name, about microaggressions.
Yeah.
How do you deal with feedback that's laced with microaggressions? Most of us carry around a lot of baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Baggage is either undealt with or unprocessed emotions, right? Like when I say undealt with, as in there's someone else, like you did something wrong. I should have corrected you when I first saw it, but I didn't. I let it go. And I see it again. Oh, I should have corrected you again, but I'm going to give you more time. And by the time now I'm trying to give you feedback, I'm actually trying to say, I want to sum up the 9 times, but since like I didn't keep track of it.
Yeah.
My intuition, my feeling is I know this has like been done a lot, and someone's like, give me examples. I can't even think of it because I haven't kept track of it.
Yeah.
But this notion of the ability to do it in real time micro adjustments, as opposed to you save it up for one large adjustment, but the person's like I just spilled a cup of water and you're yelling at me, like I'll just clean it up. And I'm like, because you spill everything all the time and you're so like, it's micro errors built up, which lead to.
I do this a lot where I'll say, I don't know what to do with this, but something about this, we call, there's a term, we call it an NQR, and not quite right. It's like this notion that like your intuition and your feeling, your gut is telling you something. Something feels not quite right about that, not quite right. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not sure what to do at this data point. But, and so what ends up happening, and if you have this opportunity to share that, I think with another adult, and that this, that there's like people feel you shouldn't talk about people behind their back. Yes. In life, it'd be nice if we all just had open conversations about everything and I think the reality is, if you can get some of that aggression out with another person about someone else, you can also process it better, right? I saw, this leader did XYZ, I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't tell on the result yet. I can't tell the lagging impact, but something about that doesn't feel right. And after a few of those, you start discussing that, you can then bring it to them saying, this is the trend I feel like is not good.
NQR.
NQR.
It's one of the most powerful terms. So it stands for not quite right. NQR. So then that gives you almost an ability, the language, to be able to call out the micro things. Because sometimes we get this thing where we're not quite sure
what to do with it.
If it's really bad, but it's not quite right.
Yeah. And isn't it nice to share that with them so that they can say, I don't know if I agree with that, but it's like you sleep on it and you wake up and like, God, maybe I do. Am I doing that? It's giving somebody time to think about it. And I think feeling you need to have the facts, well, by the time you have the facts, it's really hard for them to correct it. And then they're frustrated that you didn't tell me beforehand. So it's kind of this catch.
A good example, NQR, you know, when you meet someone saying, how are you doing?
Mm,
And then they
Right.
say something that silent, you're like, that's an NQR, right? Literally, like it was a straightforward question, you should answer, but then if they pause like that and then say, all good, you're like, wait, that's an NQR. I sense that there's something you left out. And this practice of being able to call out the NQRs lets someone know, hey, there's something that wasn't quite right.
yeah.
And that lets them then find the permission. What am I covering up? What am I not saying? And this practice of getting more fluid transparency in discussion.
And by the way, Chris, I think you had asked on Seattle, feeling the need to give somebody an action plan every time you give them feedback. I feel that's so bogus, right? People say, well, you didn't tell me what to do. I'm giving you the NQR. I'm giving you a trending signal. I think putting pressure on yourself as a feedback giver to have a plan for what they must do.
That's a classic mistake for time late.
Yeah.
I don't give the feedback because I don't have a solution,
Oh,
right? As
cool.
opposed to as an NQR, I'm just going to put it out there. I can come back. Oh my God, I have an idea.
Yeah,
a
they're
week
not,
later.
and they're also not children. If you give them the data point, you know, we talk about human beings are wired to correct if they just know what's wrong, but we have so many blind spots. If you call out a blind spot, they will, a lot of people will start to
The
self-correct.
beauty of the NQR aspect is this. If you say, hey, that's an NQR, now two brains are solving the problem. But if you say nothing, right, it's only you thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing as soon as you have team solving any problem, it just gets easier and faster and better. And so that notion of real time, giving someone the advice helps them prevent more bad. And because life is happening and we're being scored every day, everything we do, like you could help them save on the losses by just being able to saying that wasn't good. And if you say that, like it's like the person who starts every meeting with an annoying joke, saying, no, that, like that, to be honest, I wish you'd get to the point. And then they might just do less annoying jokes. As opposed to people pretend to laugh, they keep doing it. Now they're spending time researching more annoying jokes. And it's like, I mean, these things, we get into these awkward places in social dynamics. You're like, how did it get here?
Right. How did I get
Right?
here?
When I started with my manager, I started with my colleague, it wasn't like
You
this.
think about it that way, it is really cool to let somebody keep doing something that you think is NQR. And then over time, it gets worse and worse and worse. And then you wonder how that employee failed or why their career stalled. And then you feel really bad about it, right? As a leader who you feel responsible for, you're a bad coach. It's like
But I
you
look
let
at it
them
as like,
you let them stay that way.
it started so good, open
Yeah.
conversation. We're both curious, you know, growth mindset about ourselves and each other. And it gets to a place where it's like, you're scared to even say one word for flaring up the other person, offending them, I mean, whatnot. There was a question I liked also with Joe around, here's what Joe wrote. How can you approach giving feedback to someone who is much older than you? Many times I will give those who are older than I feedback and they go right into the no zone. Like this,
They don't want to hear it from someone younger.
like the idea of someone more senior. How do you give them feedback, right? Because that is a very hard one. We could spend an entire class on that, but the short answer is you have to put a lot of respect behind it. And oftentimes, when you give feedback to someone who's more experienced, more senior, there is a high chance they have data points you do not have. And so that, meaning you might sound really dumb at the end of it if you go out too strong. So everything, Megan says this all the time, the tone matters. You can do it with a tone of hey, I have an NQ and I have this I want to share, but like uncertainty versus certainty. Yeah. When you have someone who's more junior giving feedback with an incredible degree of conviction and certainty to a senior person, in those cases, you better be damn right. Yeah. Because there's a very high chance within minutes, you're going to be eating your own words. And then they will not forget, right? Words matter. What you say matters. They will not forget, right? Your tone, your certainty, and that you took with them. So there's a part where you can do it with like, you know, once again, crutch phrases, right? To like, you know, I'm struggling because I want to, this is what I'm thinking, but maybe the things I don't see, right? You can acknowledge, I don't have all the data, but I just want to share, right? Like what I'm feeling and kind of how I'm seeing this. Yeah. Like you can say feedback with respect. And that matters most, especially when you go upwards.
I think, Elle and then Vera, you both are asking a very similar questions. Maybe this is something we'll touch
Okay.
on next week. We don't plan it until kind of after the session for next week, but it's something we're working on. So the questions around like the change management needed to change from a culture of occasional feedback to, feedback that's more effective, and basically how do you change the culture? So we're working on like how to frame that, how to discuss that, because it's something we do as a company culture. We've helped other organizations, but kind of the next version of that, where feedback and coaching goes hand in hand. Like it's really hard to build a culture of feedback if you don't have a culture of coaching, right? It's like just raw feedback everywhere and nobody's trained on coaching and processing. And so the technology of the feedback app, and then we have the On My Mind app, and like how that's used and how we develop that into a self-coaching tool. So it's helping you learn how to be a better feedback giver, helping you learn how to be a better coach with all these tools and analytics. So, and we have a ton of different programs. And one of the programs is at 1 o'clock. We're going to do this live for the first time.
If you get a chance,
But we're getting there. We'll be able to share more.
it would be cool for you guys to see it, but I think the part when you're talking about
Yeah.
is there's a self-development toolkit, and then there's a team development toolkit, and they go in sequence. So we'll share that in one of our future classes.
Yeah, we're getting there.
I think the thought we had for the next class was the flip side of feedback giving, but receiving, and kind of how we process feedback we get incorrectly, and how all the more common ways that it's amazing the flip side of feedback. Someone giving feedback could literally become your puppet master. And we've seen this continuously at every level, junior levels, mid-level, senior levels, where that one piece of feedback, one person's opinion, becomes this like ground for changing big things. And there's a lot of danger in not being able to process feedback correctly. So I think we can.
So we'll do next week, yeah. But no, I love the question, Elle and Vera. I think it's something that's very on our mind. It's a very big discussion. I think we'll get into that, but it has a lot to do with setting up the right environment, setting up the right habits and rituals. Not too many things, but the right things, and getting that set up right is where we're getting there.
So I mean, there's a lot in the chat. We're going to
Yeah.
read through. What will help address that. I think the team is building a discussion board so that we have the ability with the class to then continue this discussion, because we want to help answer a lot of these questions. I mean, this is a very hot topic. There is not an organization we've met who has said, literally we've met thousands and thousands in every industry that does this well. So if you feel you're struggling with this suffering, you're in good company, as in we're all in the same boat.
Yes.
There's nobody who's doing this well, but it is something that everyone is saying we must do well. That, the idea of no feedback to an individual is literally the same as stunting their growth. It'd be like, if you need milk to grow tall, it'd be like saying no milk for you at all, ever, except for maybe 1 glass a year. And it doesn't do anything. Like, there's a notion of it is an ingredient for helping people grow and develop. It is an ingredient for organizations to succeed. Yet very few, minus the few instances of like the FBI, only when they go on mission, or certain military groups, the aviation groups tend to be better, but only when they do, post-mortem debriefs after mission training, but kind of stink at it everywhere else. 90% of the time, people tend to be really bad at this. So, important topic, we'll cover more.